So hello all, my name is Craig Norberg Bohm. I'm a staff member with NAMEN, the North American Men Engaged Network. It's my distinct pleasure to welcome you to our first Canadian Community Meetup. NAMEN's administrative offices are located in the traditional homelands of the Pentucket, Pawtucket, Namkeg, Agawam, Wampanoag, and Massachusetts, and other Indigenous nations who made their homes along the Massachusetts Bay, Charles, and Concord rivers. Welcome, everyone. As I mentioned, this is our first Canadian meetup. We're offering everyone in Canada today who attends a free year membership in NAMEN, and we'll send along information after our program today. So thank you for joining us. Let me say a short word about NAMEN itself. Our meeting today, of course, is a gathering to meet, to learn, and to network. We operate both public and member-only meetups. Today is public and focuses on Canadian territories. NAMEN, the North American Men Engaged Network, is a regional member of the global Men Engaged Alliance, encompassing both Canada and the US. The global organization encompasses the entire world, and we have 7 or 8 regions organized. Our purpose is to promote professional development in the field of men and boys engagement for gender equality. We're an ally to the pro-feminist women's movement, and we focus on intersectionality and anti and decolonization as priorities in our purposes and policy. And we're looking forward to working today along those lines together. Now, if you would bear with us for a moment, we'd love to do some social media postings today about our meetup. And along those lines, we'd love to take a social media screenshot. So if some of you, or many of you, could open your cameras, if you're willing. And if you could, we're going to take a screenshot today. And why don't we go ahead and do that? I think the screenshot we have up now is fine. So Nicole and Johanny, if you take screenshots, we will use this picture for postings today. So thank you very much.
And I don't know what to do, so.
It's okay, Elder Nora. So we're proud to partner today with the White Ribbon Organization in Canada and the Native Women's Association of Canada as well for our program. I'd like to introduce now Louise Moyer, staff with White Ribbon Campaign. Louise, over to you.
Thank you, Craig. I'm hoping my dogs don't bark a lot while I'm speaking, but let's all cross our fingers. As Craig said, I'm from White Ribbon, and we're proud to co-sponsor this event along with NAMEN. White Ribbon is a Canadian registered charitable organization that engages with men and boys in the prevention of gender-based violence by promoting equity and transforming social norms, attitudes, and behaviors. White Ribbon works across Canada and around the world with our team in different geographical locations. So where am I? I'm in a small town in Stouffville, which is in Ontario, the province of Ontario, which resides on the beautiful land of the treaty territory of the Williams Nation. It is also the traditional territory of other Anishinaabe peoples, Huron-Wendat, and the Haudenosaunee people. We are pleased, we believe wholeheartedly that the genocide of Indigenous people and the murdered and missing Indigenous women, girls, and two-spirited folks is a highly, highly critical social issue for Canadians. And the very reason why we chose this topic as our first Canadian meetup. It's a highly critical issue in Canada, and certainly also across North America. We're focusing on the Canadian context today. But we'll be planning more Canadian meetups in the fall of this year, so stay tuned. Across Canada, we're striving towards reconciliation and decolonization. White Ribbon and NAMEN will be mindful and diligent in our work with Indigenous people and communities. We will be guided by the voice of Indigenous people and promote respect to their inherent rights. We respect the traditional land of Indigenous nations, and as an act of decolonization, we will explore and understand the traditional protocols, reflect on our intentions, and build relations with nations. Today's event is an example of our commitment and our actions towards that. I'm pleased to say that we have Elder Nora Laboy, sorry. Thank you. I knew my tongue would get tied at some point here today. Elder Nora, I'm offering you this tobacco tie on behalf of White Ribbon and NAMEN for your insight and guidance with today's critical event. So it's a virtual offer, but I will courier it to you along with a gift after our meeting today.
Thank you.
They're gifts of appreciation for your wisdom and your insight, and we really feel honored to have you here. Please join me in welcoming Elder Nora to begin our event and introduce herself in her traditional ways. Thank you.
Kwe, Nindalawezi Nora, Delawio Biganchik. My name is Nora and I live in the Eel River Bar First Nation. A little bit about myself. My spirit name is She Carries the Sun in Her Heart. And I'm a turtle warrior and I carry the spirit of Mother Earth. My mother's name is Marion Simonson from Eel Ground Reserve in Miramichi, New Brunswick. My father's name is John Labilwa from Eel River Bar here. And I've always resided in Eel River Bar all my life. I'm the youngest of 14. My parents were well up in their 40s when they had me. Eel River Bar rests on the Bay of Chaleur that overlooks the beginning of the Appalachian Mountains, along with the wondrous view of sunrises and sunsets all around us. Beautiful. I had applied for funding to develop a program through addictions program to create awareness through workshops to better support and promote wellness and mental health. And the program has been very successful through the years. I'm also a certified heritage interpreter and certified addictions counselor. I gave training to Vitalite Hospital staff. It was an introduction to the Mi'kmaq culture, and that lasted for about 8 years until COVID came. And I'm passionate about anything related to energy work, such as Reiki, Theta healing, the bars, meditations. I do talking circles and other things. And I've received training in the Hearts of the Nation project, that's for residential school survivors, to support their long journey towards healing. And I had the opportunity to do burial ceremonies for a couple of community members. The families wanted me to do that. So, you know, it was an honor and privilege, of course. And I've worked in drug and alcohol program for a lot of years until I retired recently in March. And I have 2 children. I have 7 grandchildren and I have 2 great grandchildren. I'm also a great auntie. And I had taken parts and walks to support the MMIWG2S in the recent years. Like when it came around here, I'm always there. So yes, so that's that for me. Now I would like to take the opportunity to do a smudge. I started it earlier and it was going all over. So it's just the last part of it, but you will get the gist of it. And I'm just going to stand up to let you know like what we do. And this feather, this was my mother's, and she had gifted me this before she passed on. So when we smudge, we will smudge our minds so that we can only think positive things, have positive thoughts, and over our eyes so we can see things that are here and not here, you know, and then our ears so we can hear only good things and hear positive things, and also from our spirit world. And we offer in our hearts to have an open heart. It's important to have an open heart and an open mind so they can connect. And what else? We would just do our arms. There's many ways. You can do it with a feather. You don't have to. But it helps. And then what we would do is, I know you can't see me, but I would go under my feet too. So we would walk softly on Mother Earth, be like a deer that walks softly. Oh, great spirit, whose voice I hear in the wind, hear me from young, small, and weak, and I seek your strength. I seek strength, O great one, not to be superior to my brothers, but to conquer my greatest enemy, myself. I seek wisdom, the lessons you have hidden under every leaf and rock, so that I may carry this life and hope to my people. May my hands respect the many beautiful things you have made. My ears be sharp to hear your voice. May I always walk in your beauty. May my eyes ever behold the red and purple sunsets, so that when life fades like the setting sun, our spirit will come to you without shame. And I added a little heart. I pray that all who went missing or murdered went to you with free spirits. I pray that all who were taken from us way too soon went to you with free spirits. Creator, we pray for those who are still missing and that they find a way back to their loved ones. And now I will offer a song that came to me. Like what I mean by that is it came to me from Creator. I had asked for a song to come, and these were the words that came out. Off in a distance, not many miles away, our people live there from life as we know it today. Grandmothers, can you show us the way? Take our hearts and hold them in your hand. Take our tomorrows, surround them with your love. Show us there is closely, I am nearby. Hear the thundering spirits, the kindred hearts. Grandmothers can show us the way. Take our hearts and hold them in your hand. Take our tomorrows, surround them with your love. Show us there is a way. Hey, 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 Grandmothers, can you show us the way? Hey, wala na ako sit no, hey. And that concludes my part. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Elder Nora. That was really touching and insightful and very beautiful. Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Humberto Carollo, our Executive Director of White Ribbon, and also on the Board of Directors for Men Engage Global. Over to you, Humberto.
Thank you so much, Louise, and thank you, Elder Nora, for that beautiful, inspiring introduction. It really touched my heart, and I'm so glad that you are here with us today and sharing your wisdom with us. So thank you again. I want to also thank the Native Women's Association of Canada and all the panelists that I'm about to introduce as well, and for participating today. And I want to extend a special welcome to all of you in the audience for participating. And we look forward to this amazing, important dialogue. I want to also pay my respects to the beautiful land where I stand on, where I live and work and socialize, the Michi, Sagig, Anishinaabe territory, also known as Durham Region or smaller town of Whitby in Ontario. We are so proud to join efforts with the Native Women's Association of Canada, and honored to do so, and also with the North American Men Engaged Network, to have this learning, this opportunity to dialogue today. So thank you to them. We're deeply grateful for their work and their leadership and advocacy in this area. So we're going to first hear from our guest speaker from the Native Women's Association, who I'll introduce in a moment. And then we're going to invite our panel members to participate in the discussion. Our presentation, our dialogue today will be in English, but you're welcome to turn on the translation feature that's available through the Zoom platform. You can choose to view automatically translated captions in several languages. It's a little bit complicated, but may be helpful for those of you who wish to follow today's dialogue in your language of choice. Please, those of you in the audience, introduce yourselves over chat to let us know who you are and the land that you are living and working in, and also the organizations that you represent. We welcome your introductions over chat. We don't have many ground rules. We welcome your participation, and we at any point we welcome you to ask questions and to be aware of the time that you take, and to keep your microphones on quiet mode, and to raise your hand when you'd like to participate, and we'll invite you to then turn on your camera and address all of us. Yeah, I'm going to now introduce Brandy Stanovich and invite Brandy to share with us her research and findings and the calls to action from the Missing Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls report. So Brandy Stanovich is the MMIGW2S Plus Manager and Chelsea Lodge Advisor of the Native Women's Association of Canada, NWAC. She volunteers her time as President of the Indigenous Women of the Wabanaki Territory in New Brunswick, and in July of 2022 was elected as second Vice President of the Native Women's Association of Canada. As a longstanding advocate for Indigenous women in Canada and for murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls, Brandy takes on causes that affect Indigenous families and communities at the local, national, and international levels, particularly causes related to advancing public awareness and action on Canada's genocide to bring about social and political change. Since working with NWAC, she has supported a number of initiatives such as Change the Bill Initiative, Language, Art, MMIWG2S Plus, and Resiliency Lodges. As someone who's invested in protecting Indigenous language, Brandy has worked with Woodstock First Nation to help create a Wolastoqey language curriculum and teach the language to students and families. She's also involved in NWAC's work on preserving Indigenous languages. Brandy is committed to making a positive difference in the lives of others and truly believes that everyone has something valuable to contribute to the planet. She studied in the Maliseet Immersion Program at St. Thomas University, as well as the Aboriginal Visual Arts Program with the New Brunswick College of Craft and Design. A mother of 8 children, Brandy enjoys spending time with her family, engaging in on-the-land activities, attending sweat ceremonies, canoeing, fishing, gardening, traveling, painting, and other craft initiatives. Brandy, it's a true honor to have you with us today, and I'll pass it on to you. Welcome.
Thank you. So I just want to acknowledge the Wolastoqey territory where I'm coming from today. I'm here in New Brunswick, and we do have a slideshow to present. So we're going to start off, and I'll tell you about the Native Women's Association of Canada. It's a national Indigenous organization representing political voices of Indigenous women, girls, and US LGBTQ plus people in Canada. NWAC is inclusive of First Nations, on and off reserve status, non-status, and disenfranchised Inuit and Métis. An aggregate of Indigenous women's organizations from across the country, NWAC was founded on a collective goal to enhance, promote, and foster social, economic, cultural, and political well-being of Indigenous women, girls, and 2S LGBTQ plus people in their respective communities and Canadian societies. For over 47 years, NWAC has applied an intersectional, trauma-informed, culturally safe, gendered approach to support the needs of Indigenous women and 2S LGBTQ plus people. As a result, NWAC has an in-depth understanding of intersectional factors impacting health, specifically nuanced and holistic understandings of mental wellness amongst Indigenous communities. NWAC has established strong and lasting governance structures, decision-making processes, financial policies and procedures, as well as networks with grassroots connections. NWAC has a long and sustained history of advocacy relating to and redressing the MMIWG2S plus genocide. NWAC's Sisters in Spirit initiative created the first MMIWG2S plus database and was a catalyst for advocacy that led to the national inquiry into the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in tandem with the family members that sought justice for their loved ones. NWAC served as a party with standing at the national inquiry and provided recommendations that informed the creation of the 231 calls to justice. NWAC was strategically positioned to provide insights to the inquiry due to the community-based and widespread grassroots reach. Today, NWAC continues its commitment to developing concrete actions to end the cycle of violence that affects Indigenous communities, particularly violence leading to the disappearance or death of Indigenous women and girls. These initiatives are guided by our action plan. Our calls are actions. With 66 concrete, short, medium, and long-term actions with measurable and costed steps to put an end to the violence, improve the well-being, and support the healing of Indigenous women and 2S LGBTQ peoples. This work includes violence prevention services, both virtually and in person at our resiliency lodges, and policy development and advocacy. Indigenous women in Canada are 12 times more likely to be missing or murdered than non-Indigenous women. Rooted in Canada's history of colonization, Indigenous women, girls, and 2S LGBTQ+ people in Canada face higher rates of violence than non-Indigenous women. Once held in high regard as leaders and givers of life, Indigenous women are now devalued because their race and gender. The intersection of Indigenous identity and other social, economic, and demographic factors contribute heavily to violence experienced by Indigenous women. This has led to disproportionately higher rates of experienced violence, spousal assault, family violence, and sexual assault towards Indigenous women, girls, and gender diverse people. In addition, the persistent and deliberately human and Indigenous rights violations and abuses have also resulted in staggering rates of violence against Indigenous women and 2S LGBTQ+ people. This includes misreporting or failure to report incidences of violence or disappearances by police and justice services. This deliberate disregard for the safety of Indigenous women and girls and gender diverse people led to the national inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls to define this violence as genocidal. The national inquiry into MMIWG was taken with uncovering and assessing the systematic and root causes of all forms of violence, including existing institutional policies and practices against Indigenous women, girls, and 2S LGBTQ+ peoples. Its analysis showed that an inescapable conclusion, the ongoing violence and deliberate human and Indigenous rights violations amount to a genocide, and that colonial violence is a root cause of the MMIWG 2S crisis in Canada. The national inquiry published a supplementary report to the final title, A Legal Analysis of Genocide, to support their conclusion. This report provided an overview of Canada's past and present harmful policies, omissions, and actions towards Indigenous people. Genocide, as defined by the UN Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, 1951, an international treaty that criminalizes genocide and obligates states to pursue the enforcement of its prohibition. Genocide requires 3 elements. Number 1, victims are a part of a protected group, which could be national, ethnical, racial, or religious groups. Number 2, to commit at least one of 5 of the following prohibited acts. A, murder. B, causing serious bodily or mental harm. C, inflicting on the group conditions of life that lead to destruction. D, preventing births within the group. And E, transferring children from the group to another group. And then number 3, to commit those acts with an intent to destroy the group. Genocide is the intentional inhalation of a group of people. It continues to take the lives of Indigenous women, girls, and 2S LGBTQ+ people. In various past, present interactions, in various past and present rations of colonial policies, practices, and actions and inactions, including Canada has committed all 5 types of acts, including residential schools, forced sterilization, and the child welfare system, and MMIWG2S. And you'll see here on the screen all of the different things that they've done, from the smallpox blankets to the residential schools. And then, so yeah, and there's also going to be a link to this genocide book that we do have out, so you can go over it and share it. So we can move on to the next slide, I think. There we go. Oh, okay. The intent to destroy the group can be observed in the colonial policies and conduct. And you'll see sorry. And there's just kind of like an illustration of how that happened. The genocide in Canada is understood as a composite act, which is a breach of an international obligation by state through a series of actions or omissions defined as an aggregate. As wrongful, that occurred over time and persists today. According to the National Inquiry's supplementary report on genocide, genocidal contact can occur through both action and omission. As stated in the report, the failure to act can contribute to genocidal conduct. Sorry, I think I'm gonna have to turn off this other computer. Just give me 1 second here. It's messing up my connection and stuff here. Okay, sorry about that. Okay. There we are. So ending the genocide also requires decolonization, giving the power back to Indigenous people who have a right to self-determination, listening and respecting the perspectives of Indigenous people, and rebuilding Turtle Island in the way led by truth. The National Inquiry and the 231 calls to justice. In the National Inquiry into the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls was Canada's first national inquiry, and its mandate was to investigate and report on the systematic, underlying, and historical causes of all forms of violence against Indigenous women, girls, and US LGBTQ+ people, as well as the institutional practices and policies implemented in response to this violence, and to make recommendations for change. It was a legal process informed by Indigenous protocol, where public hearings were held from coast to coast, and the National Inquiry heard from family members, survivors of violence, experts, and knowledge keepers. Taking place between September 1st, 2016 and April 30th, 2019, members of the National Inquiry engaged with more than 2,300 participants through truth gathering process. This process included 1,484 family members and survivors, and 83 experts, knowledge keepers, and officials. The National Inquiry was a mandate to examine and report the systemic causes behind the violence faced by Indigenous women and girls experienced, and their greater vulnerability to violence. This included an examination of practices, policies, and institutions to understand their contribution to the crisis. On April 30th, 2019, the National Inquiry published the final report of their findings, provided the Government of Canada with 231 recommendations, the calls to justice, which developed concrete actions to remove systemic causes of violence and ways to honor and commemorate MMIWG2S+ people. According to the findings of the National Inquiry, the 231 calls to justice are imperatives aimed at ending the genocide, rather than optional recommendations that the government has a legal obligation to fully implement them. Each year, NWAC publishes a scorecard assessing the federal government's progress and implementing the calls to justice, as well as the national action plan they released in response to the National Inquiry in 2021. According to our evaluation and analysis based on the information available to the public, the federal government is receiving failing marks and is not fulfilling its legal responsibility outlined under multiple international human rights treaties, including the Convention on Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, Genocide Convention. As previously mentioned, genocidal conduct occurs through both action and omission. As stated in the National Inquiry, the failure to act can contribute to genocidal conduct. This clearly demonstrates the responsibility of the federal government to respond and act urgently in order to end the genocide. The calls for justice that could engage with men, the men could engage with education would be 15.2 and 15.3. Develop knowledge and a better understanding of Canada's historical and ongoing colonial violence against Indigenous peoples. It affects, as well as about the MMIWG2S+ genocide. Read the final report of the National Inquiry, the calls for justice. The educational material on Safe Passage website. There are also transcripts available from family members and survivors who shared their truths, as well as from expert witnesses who shared their knowledge on the website of the National Inquiry. Consult with violence prevention educational resources. Okay, so the Safe Passage website. Engage in allyship. 15.1, 15.5, 15.6. Denounce all forms of violence against Indigenous women, girls, and 2S LGBTQ plus people, and speak out against racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, wherever it occurs. Listen to the voices of Indigenous women, girls, and 2S LGBTQ plus people. Stand in solidarity with them and protect them, support and promote their rights and safety. Advocate for policy changes by reaching out to your elected representatives and help hold all levels of government accountable to implement the calls to justice and act on their commitments. Raise awareness, 1.8, about the MMIWG2S genocide among your social and professional circles, and share information on social media and participate in social media campaigns. Support Indigenous organizations by considering donating funds, volunteering, and providing other means of support. Additionally, there are calls for justice aimed at individuals engaged in specific professions, including attorneys, educators, social workers, health and wellness providers, people working in extractive industries and correctional services. We invite you to consider these specific calls to justice and engage with them if they apply to you. However, we also encourage people to read all of the calls to justice and engage with them creatively. Perhaps a call for justice is meant to be acted on by the government, but individuals can also take action towards implementing them. Safe Passage is a community-driven, trauma-informed, and survivor-centered website created by NWAC in response to the calls for justice of the National Inquiry into MMIWG2S+. With a holistic and trauma-informed national MMIWG2S+ database, research and educational tools, and culturally relevant support and care, Safe Passage seeks to inspire and transform and a transformational change. Together, we can lead the end to MMIWG2S+ genocide and restore the Indigenous women, girls, and 2S LGBTQIA+ people's place in the world as sacred, loved, honored members of their communities. Safe Passage provides insight into the scope of MMIWG2S+ genocide as an empowering tool for community members to help keep themselves and each other safe by exchanging information, allows Indigenous women, girls, and 2S LGBTQ+ people to understand the risks and resources available to them in their communities, as well as communities they plan to travel to. And this is from the Safe Passage website here on the slide. The maps for the MMIWG2S+ cases by the region and type to better educate and inform the Canadian public about ongoing MMIWG2S+ genocide. It monitors safety concerns through unsafe experiences, reporting tool, and map. This feature enables Indigenous women, girls, and 2S LGBTQ+ people to anonymously report experiences and areas where they have felt, and for community members to view with this information on the map by region and type of unsafe experience. It also provides distinction-based safety resources to community resources map, which contains over 1,500 immediate long-term safety resources and can be filtered by region and resource type. It centers the voices and stories of MMIWG2S+ families and survivors through the Safe Passage stories, a digital space that commemorates and honors MMIWG2S+ people. It also provides resources for individuals, industries, and communities that are directly connected to the MMIWG2S+ genocide, and provides specific and distinction-based training and tools. Also providing elder and knowledge keeper support for individuals who have been impacted by the loss of a missing or murdered loved one. The Safe Passage Elders Knowledge Keepers can provide emotional support and guidance that is grounded within Indigenous knowledge and healing practices. How men can engage with Safe Passage. Learning more about the scope of the genocide through MMIWG2S+ map and the MMIWG2S+ research available on the Resource Center page. Consulting with resources like the Community Toolkit to learn how to identify human trafficking. So going forward, for the federal government, NWAC's recommendations are they must release a costed, measurable, and actionable implementation plan, increase transparency and accountability and reporting on the progress and funding allocations, accelerate the implementation of the National Action Plan. They must address every call of justice as they are legally obligated to. Establish a national redress alert that would function in a similar way to the Amber Alert, used for the recovery of a missing child, which would send emergency notifications to the public when Indigenous women, girls, and 2S+ relative is reported missing or is endangered. The redress alert would support an immediate, more thorough, and effective search and would increase the possibility of bringing them home safely. NWAC also recommends the creation of a national, independent, permanent, and fully funded Indigenous-led Ombudsman's Office to monitor and ensure the oversight and the urgent implementation of all 231 calls for justice. In accordance with Canada's obligations under national and international law, the Ombudsperson's Office would serve as an oversight body and provide an accountability mechanism to implementing the calls to justice. And it is an important step to give strength to the calls to justice, to ensure that family members, survivors, and communities are fully supported by the government. Importantly, the creation of the Ombudsperson's Office will remove the onus from families and survivors to advocate for implementing the calls to justice, as it would ensure the creation of an implementation plan, timeline, and monitoring, including introducing evaluation intervals to be included in this set of actions, or crafting the language that allows for a process to evolve and improve depending on the changing environmental needs of the National Action Plan. NWAC also encourages the creation of a national Indigenous human rights tribunal to oversee the human rights violations relating to the MMIWG2S+ genocide. Thank you. That concludes my presentation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Brandy, for sharing these amazing calls to justice with us, for sharing the work that you and NWAC have been doing to advocate for change and to help us all understand what we can do to redress the historical and current injustices that are experienced by Indigenous women, girls, and 2S LGBTQI Indigenous folks. We appreciate the work you do, your leadership, and thank you so much for sharing again this amazing presentation with us. We're going to turn it over to our panelists now, and Brandy, I invite you to be part of that dialogue as well. And so let me first do a quick introduction of the panel members, and then we'll take some turns sharing our takeaways and our own calls to action as well. So I would love to introduce first Robin Bourgeois, and Robin is the vice provost of Indigenous engagement at Brock University. She was also recently appointed to the Ontario Domestic Violence Death Review Coroners Committee, where we've had an opportunity to meet and start our important work together. She teaches in the Center for Women's and Gender Studies, and her research focuses on Indigenous feminisms, violence against Indigenous women and girls, and Indigenous women political activism and leadership. Robin is a mixed race Cree woman who is originally from the Silix and Splatsnan territories of British Columbia. She has been a strong champion for decolonizing aspects of campus life through targeted hiring practices, increased research opportunities, and engagement opportunities for all community members. So welcome, Robin. And I also have the pleasure of introducing Will Schelling, who is a senior consultant at Council Public Affairs, advising clients in British Columbia and across Canada on government relations strategies with a focus on intersectionality, community-based support, and a data-driven approach. He honed his knowledge of political systems through working at UBC's Student Society, supporting students and their families on issues of affordability and access to post-secondary education at all levels of government. Will also sat on various committees for UBC and on topics of EDI, affordability, and climate issues, bringing together stakeholders across Vancouver to support equitable outcomes. He's also involved in his community with the City of Vancouver's Climate Equity Working Group. He holds a BA in political science with a minor in international relations from the University of British Columbia, and then MA in public policy and global affairs, specializing in human rights and social change at the University of British Columbia. And Will is also a director on the White Ribbon Board of Directors. So welcome, Will. Thank you for joining us today as well. And Dave Shanks is an associate director and the lead facilitator for the Students' Commission of Canada. He has the privilege of being able to travel to many spots across the country of Canada, leading workshops, delivering training and running conferences for young people and the adults who care for them. Dave is a father of 3 children and coaches soccer and football, and is particularly passionate about working alongside young men and boys. And he finds using his own experience as a teen parent a great way to bond with other young fathers. Father engagement is extremely important to Dave, and finding new and innovative ways to connect with young men and boys in order to help them be well-rounded and healthy humans. He is how he exhibits his generativity to the rest of the world. So starting with Robin, welcome again. We're so glad to have you. So of all the calls to justice and the amazing insights that Brandy shared with us, what is the one that most resonates to you as an individual and as a professional working, particularly in the education sector? And I know you love this question, right? And this is something that it's in all of our minds, and we hear often from everyone everywhere. What can I do? This seems like overwhelming. It's ever present. It's in our consciousness. It hurts our hearts. We want to do something. What do we do? So over to you, Robin.
Thank you. And thank you for having me part of this important discussion today. I will say, I think it's important before I answer the question is to give some context, because to me, this was really always a very personal issue. I'm Cree, my family comes from Treaty 8 territories, so the Lesser Slave Lake region. And I had experienced my late teens that changed my life forever. I was trafficked for sexual exploitation in Vancouver's downtown east side. And I survived an experience that a lot of women don't. And in fact, I have sisters who are not actual biological sisters. That's how I refer to my friends, but who ended up on being murdered and who ended up being found on the Picton farm. And so to me, this was always personal. And having survived that, I came out of this going, okay, what am I good at? I'm really good at school was my answer. And so I ended up going straight to the top and pursuing a PhD because I saw that letters after my name and people calling me doctor gave me access to spaces I didn't have before. But as I was, I ended up testifying actually as an expert and experiential witness at the inquiry. And I have to say, I did that unwillingly in some ways because I had done my entire doctoral research on every other time we had gone as Indigenous women to talk to the government about this kind of violence, whether it was family violence. I'd actually written about the work of the Native Women's Association of Canada and spent a lot of time with them in 2009 and 2010. And I had written all of these pieces and I was like, this isn't going to go anywhere. And so I was reticent, but when they call and ask and you have a chance to be in a space that other women like you couldn't have been in because they didn't survive, you go. And so when I finished, and I happened to be, funny thing, the report dropped when I was in Vancouver. And I happened, so where my story starts is where I was when that report dropped. And I was reflecting on, what am I going to do? If I've been really critical and I want to be part of the solution, what is that? And so what I did, and this is the advice I give everybody, is to look where you are and see what you can do. So I realized that one of the things I could do in a really impactful way, being an educator, was that I could bring the report to life and do so as somebody who had inside knowledge, somebody who has spent, almost 20 years involved in research on this topic, someone who has been involved in more than 20 years of activism, and someone who was intimately involved in that inquiry. So I've been leading at Brock along with a colleague actually who ended up coming to the first one, and we ended up meeting and realizing, oh my gosh, we can do this together. So a colleague of mine named Fallon Farinacci, who was also involved in the inquiry. But the two of us, we've been leading a group called the Decolonial Reading Circle at Brock. So it's a public education entity. It's open to the public. So Brock staff, students, and faculty are welcome to come, but so are community, because that was the idea, that we're going to open the doors to the university, which tends to be privileged because of tuition and things like that, right? That we would open it to the public. And so we've met, we're entering our fourth cycle. So 4 years now we've been doing this, and we do once a month, we meet and we read chapters of the inquiry and we talk about them together with the goal of helping people identify what they can do in their lives to be able to enact the calls for justice. And it's been powerful. It's been just like what I did not want this report to sit on a shelf. And so for me, that was the easiest way for me to be part of the solution and not part of the problem. And so then when I got to the part of what else can people do? That's where I start. You can all do things in your life. And, even for me, I would say it starts even before you even look at the calls, for me in many ways. I mean, I think all of the groups in this, or the folks in this room, are doing the same kind of work. And so for me, it actually started with being a parent. I have 3 kids, and I made certain decisions about how I was going to raise my kids in a different way than I'd experienced. I raised my kids with knowledge of consent since the time they were little. I'm one of those parents. If I say to my kids, can I have a hug? And they say no, I don't force them. That is, I wanted them to understand that I don't use physical violence in my house. And that's the first in my family because of the intergenerational trauma of residential school. That was the norm. And I made that decision. So we can work in those ways and then move up to what else can we do? And I always say to people, educate yourself. Spend time, read this report. It is really thorough. There's a lot of good stuff in there. Read that report. Learn, go out and support Indigenous women in their events and learn from them. I think those are really important things you can do right on the spot. One thing that really helps us, and I've got to tell you, as somebody who's been doing this for a long time, I was just recalling to somebody, we had a redress event here on May 5th. And we had oh my gosh, I would say a couple hundred people show up. And I was reflecting on how I remember, even 20 years ago, being in the streets of Toronto, having a rally, and there'd be like a dozen of us, like in the biggest city in the country. So showing up when we have events like Red Dress Day, show up and support and amplify the words that we as Indigenous women and girls are saying, and our Two-Spirit community. I think that's really important. As a parent of a trans child, it's even more pressing for me now. I'm seeing the kind of the issues that they're facing that are specific. They're not only experiencing racism as an Indigenous child, but they're experiencing transphobia and trans misogyny. So I think that's really, really important. But come be part of those events, support our communities, amplifies our voices. Don't speak for us. I always say that. You know what? We are survivors. We're here because we've been doing this work. And if, I really think about the inquiry, it took 40 years to get that inquiry. And that wasn't because of, that wasn't because of Justin Trudeau. I'm sure he'll get the credit for it, but it wasn't. It was 40 years of activism on the part of Indigenous women. And so we don't need to be rescued, but we need your support. And we need you to look in your spot and see how can you contribute to this. And it can be in your home, it can be education, it can be in your organizations, it can be doing events like this. I think there's something for everybody in that report. And I just encourage you to explore and see what you can do. So I will stop there.
Beautifully said, so inspiring, and thank you for sharing your own story of survival and resiliency. It's inspiring. It's humbling to hear, and I must share. Like every time, stories of survival, of loss, of grief, of hardship shared by Indigenous women and folks to us. LGBTQ folks, it always brings a great deal of sadness, but also of wanting to do more. And I think telling stories and listening to those stories and believing and thinking of small steps, small actions like those that you've shared with us is such a meaningful way of figuring out what each of us can do. So thank you for sharing that inspiration with us. Will, how about you? Robin talked about the importance of that cross-intersectional allyship for us to take on, right? And so, first of all, which of the calls for justice resonate most with you? And tell us a little bit more about intersectional allyship, what it means to you, and what you recommend other folks to do as well in that respect.
Yeah. Excuse me. Thank you, Humberto, for the lovely introduction. Also, Robin, I just wrote down one of your notes that was, quote, "We don't need to be rescued. We need your support." And if I could literally say that to every person who I both work with and I interact with, that literally is it. And when I think about the calls for justice, I mean, in my opinion, I feel like calling out racism, discrimination, and anti-Indigenous racism and also violence experienced by especially queer and trans folks right now, that's the bare minimum. I mean, I don't think we are necessarily needing to tell people now, maybe you shouldn't do that in a nice way. It's no, knock that off. In my opinion, especially in the spaces that I operate within, I think it's so interesting because you have a lot of folks who want to do this work. They want to be better allies, or they want to be better advocates. And I think, we need to continually move beyond this understanding of allyship into advocacy and being an active accomplice. And so, of course, when I use that knowledge, I'm harkening back to some of the, work that one of my former colleagues, Cicely Bell Blaine, would always mention to me, especially for myself as, a cisgendered, a cis-het man. I think it's super important to not only be mindful of the space you're taking up, but more importantly, who needs to, have the floor. And I think that, by having that sort of space made, you allow people to shine, and you also allow people to kind of speak to what they are experts in. And I think it is your lived experience. I mean, for me, my relationship with colonialism is extremely complicated. I'm a mixed race Black man. I am both American and Canadian. I know, weird, but one of the more interesting things about it is I think it gives me more of a cross-cutting lens to be able to say yeah, we can hold multiple spoons. We can hold different perspectives and understand that, at one point or another, certain groups may need more support, more allyship, or more advocacy done, with them or even on their behalf in certain rooms. But that doesn't necessarily mean we have to forget about other folks in the process. I think, especially in 2020 and 2021, a lot of folks would obviously, come to me and they'd say, well, like, how do we show up for Black folks? How do we show up for, Indigenous folks? And I'm like, well, understand that these things are linked. And one of the big systems of oppression that they are linked by is colonialism. And I think when we talk about kind of that intersectional allyship, it is developing a better lens to be able to evaluate situations, not just in your workplace, but also in your lives, about how colonialism and colonial practices and indicators and characteristics of white supremacy, for that matter. I'm talking about things such as perfectionism. I'm talking about a sense of urgency. I'm talking about be characterized one right way, that we need to be breaking down, and we need to be better understanding exactly how we can move forward. And especially when we start to break down barriers when it comes to one system of oppression, of course, it may morph or it may change. And that's what it is designed to do. It is incredibly resilient. But again, as Robin said, people don't need to be rescued, they need support. And I think, especially by doing that, male allies, and excuse me, I should correct my language, male and masculine allies should better understand, that it's not going to be about you in that moment. You have a significant amount of privilege, but that also means you can utilize that privilege, to give space to someone else. I think one of the things that obviously comes up in my work a lot as a government relations consultant is, when clients come to us and they talk to us about, whatever topic, I'm always in the room thinking about, okay, cool, like this is a really interesting project, but how do other groups involved? How are other groups involved? How do we, talk about marginalized Canadians? How do we bring up racially diverse Canadians? How do we also spotlight and highlight, Indigenous, First Nations, or Métis folks? And with that in mind, you're able to better, I should say myself, I'm able to better develop my advocacy so that it actually ends up hitting more mechanisms within government. If we're going to, natural resources with a very specific ask, we're actually able to develop different messaging and go to Indigenous services, or we're able to go to women and gender equality to have stronger conversations and say, actually, like, this is a problem for your ministry as well. And I think that kind of intersectional lens is obviously accomplished by just stepping back and saying, you know what, like, who else isn't at the table here? And then figuring out a way to bring those folks there. But yeah, also, Robin, you and I should compare notes on a different time. We seem to both have a lot of experience when it comes to working in the academy and in the university, and especially a place like UBC. A lot to talk about.
You should. I love it. I love it. It connects. Yes. And continue on the amazing work and advocacy. And thank you for sharing that perspective, Will. And absolutely, these systems of oppression don't exist in silos. And it's important that we recognize that. And when we think about our roles as allies, we can't cherry pick what to be allies for. We got to be allies across the board and understand and accept that these oppressions are interlinked. So, Dave, you're a parent. You bring that experience of being a young parent and being in a position to help to influence, young people around you, whether it be in your life or in the work that you do. So, tell us about which of these calls for justice resonate the most to you, and how do you do the kind of example that Robin shared with us around, influencing the kids in our lives, and how do you do that in the kind of way that Will has called on us to do, in an intersectional way? How do we help collectively the new generations of young people to learn about this issue, and how do we support their leadership into the present and the future in addressing this issue and bringing greater justice to Indigenous peoples everywhere?
Yeah, thanks, Humberto. Can you hear me okay? Okay, thanks. Just also like to start by thanking Elder Nora for opening us in a good way. That was so important, so nice. Thank you. So I'm calling in from Treaty 6 territory. I'm in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, homeland of the of Cree peoples, Nakota, Lakota, Dakota, and also about an hour away from Batoche, a key site for the Métis rebellion. I also wanted to start with a quote. Yesterday, we were doing I did a prelim check-in, and I swear this means that Facebook is listening to me at all times, because right after that, like one of these memory things popped up from like years ago. So this is a quote from Bell Hooks. The first act of violence that patriarchy demands of males is not violence towards women. Instead, patriarchy demands of all males that they engage in acts of psychic self-mutilation, that they kill off the emotional parts of themselves. If an individual is not successful in emotionally crippling himself, he can count on patriarchal men to enact rituals of power that will assault his self-esteem. So for me, and it's actually timely too, I was helping my son, he's 16, and he had an art project to come up with something to do with the calls for justice. And we talked about it and landed on 7.3, which is calls for health and wellness for service providers. We call upon all governments and health service providers to support Indigenous-led prevention initiatives in the areas of health and community awareness, including but not limited to programming for Indigenous men and boys, related to suicide prevention strategies for youth and adults, related to sexual trafficking awareness and no barrier exiting, specific to safe and healthy relationships, specific to mental health awareness, related to 2S LGBTQIA issues and sex positivity. So I think that's the one that really feels closest to me. And, when we talk about working with young and and I'm probably going to I may go from teary to jokey in like 20 seconds. It's a very, it's a very emotional topic for me. And lost a young man a few years ago to violence in Saskatoon. And he was really instrumental in a lot of the guys' work and young father engagement work that we were doing here in the city. And he talked a lot about the importance of having real models instead of role models. And it's something that always really landed with me. So when I'm working with young people, I try my best to be very authentic. So, oftentimes, when I'm introducing myself as well, I like to introduce myself as also an active drug user. I'm an addict. I use caffeine every day. I use tobacco, commercial tobacco. I don't always, respect the sacredness of tobacco. I use cannabis. I use alcohol. I'm recovering from crystal meth addiction. And, I think it's not for everyone. But if you're comfortable enough to be authentic, that's how we get young men and to share. That's how we get them to be open. That's how we discuss the issues. They need to see representations of masculinity across the board. They need to see the tough Rambo guys who, that's their role. They want to be the protectors. We need the sensitive Spider-Man, Spidey sense feeling guys out there, who can feel when people are need support. And I really also want to thank Brandy for her sharing, because one of the projects we've done in the Students' Commission this past year is called Truth Leading to Reconciliation. There's a lot of people that want to skip over the truth and they want to go right to reconciliation. And reconciliation can't occur unless we're talking about the truth. And these kinds of presentations and this kind of knowledge about the truth is very empowering for young people. I live about an hour away from Gordon's First Nation, where the last residential school closed in the country in 1996. Some people would even say 1998. So I've helped some young people in pursuing justice. I was 16, to 18 years old when that last residential school closed. So I'm working with young people that are still affected directly by residential schools. So I really think that this, that talking about the truth, being open and having honest, authentic conversations about it is still so needed before we move on to talking about reconciliation. Thanks, Humberto.
Wow, Dave. you know, you are a real model, all right. You shared with us vulnerability and empathy and compassion, and those are the kinds of so many of the qualities that we ask young men and adult men as well to take on as we consider our roles in addressing this issue. It is that ability to express emotions, to be vulnerable, and to role model that for our new generations and existing generations as well. So thank you. I love that concept of being a real model rather than a role model. So thank you for sharing that with us. Brandy, I'm going to invite you back. Come on over, join us, and let us know what you think about what was just shared. And I also have a question for you, follow up from your presentation, which I really appreciated. And I recall a time when for Canadians hearing the word genocide as it relates to the loss of Indigenous history, culture, language, and lives was really difficult to comprehend. And I'm really glad that you started the presentation with, what does it mean to consider this as a form of genocide? And I would love for you to talk a little bit more about why is that so important? And again, what can we do to help Canadians and everyone really truly understand that this is in fact genocide committed over the years, over the centuries, and continues to be committed against Indigenous people everywhere?
Yeah, well, I mean, it started with, oh, am I on mute? Can you hear me? Okay, sorry. I'm on my phone now, so that made it a little difficult to tell. So yeah, it started with colonization. They came here as friends. Our treaties are the peace and friendship treaties. They say that they're the strongest in the land because they give every single person the right to defend the land. So here, if they want to put in a mine, we can stop them by just being there. That's not always the case across Canada. Well, we were amongst the first to be colonized. And I have people living in my community today that actually starved growing up. They couldn't even eat. They weren't allowed to hunt. They weren't allowed to fish. They weren't, allowed to practice their culture. They were considered demons and demonic and devilish for, having a sweat ceremony, for singing and chanting our songs, our beautiful songs. That's not just chanting. The words, they have meaning behind them. And there's a lot of prayer in our songs. The language, I had an elder from my community tell me, and it still kind of chokes me up because I could see her. She's an elder in front of me, but when she told me the story, I could see that little girl that spoke her language that was taken into the bathroom, and a hot pepper was put in her mouth until the Indian agent left, and her mouth was bleeding. They left that pepper in her mouth, so her mouth bled, and then she went home and she got in trouble because she got in trouble at school. And we are still suffering those effects of genocide in the Wolastoqey communities. We have possibly around 100 fluent speakers left. I know here in my community, there's two fluent speakers of our language in this community that I live in. And that's the result of genocide. Oh, sorry, my battery. So, supporting, getting back to the culture, the language, attending, when there's a powwow, show up, bring your friends, feed that culture and that, the language that we were lost. I can speak from my personal experience. I wasn't raised with my language, and I always had this hole inside me, something was missing, and I could never put my finger on it. I was 2 weeks into my language course that I could start to feel that hole start to close. Because it was my language, and the language is a connection to the land. I can give you one example. The word gaka-goose. You could probably guess what that means. The crow, the sound, ga, ga. That's where you get your words is from the land. If I answer you in my language, if you ask me how I am, and I would say Manjane Beswin, I'm not just saying I'm good or I'm okay. I'm saying I'm still one and the same with the universe around me, with Mother Earth, with all living beings. So it's a deeper connection. So when the genocide first happened, that's what was taken from us. That connection, that sense of belonging. You know, I want to go into this place I can't stop thinking about, and it's a little far-fetched, but it's decolonizing time. There's 13 moons and there's 28 months on the turtle's back, or 28, sorry, 28 months, 28 little squares. So that's 28 days in a month, 13 moons. We have our calendar. So all of us as humans on Mother Earth are living out of rhythm with the real time since colonization. You know, and when I think about this stuff, that's one of the things that always comes up. And some people think, oh my gosh, you're crazy. That's bizarre. But to me, it's real. You know, because if we all kind of feel a little, you know, like I know, like a little not, something's not right here. And I think that's what it goes back to, as being out of rhythm with our first mother, Mother Earth. And I hope that kind of stayed on the topic. I know, but a little bit more about our connection to our first mother, but that's what was lost. And another thing, when we were colonized, we lost the laws of the land, and that harmony and that balance that the indigenous people of this land used to live by. And through our resiliency center here in the Wabanaki territories, those are things that we want to get back to. We're going to start growing our own medicines, practicing, how to use them, preserve them, going back to food sovereignty. So slowly, like through the resiliency centers, we're going back to our old ways. And unfortunately, we only have the one in Chelsea and the one here that isn't even open to the public yet. But we're hoping to have those all across the country. So I guess that I'll end there.
So
I could talk all
amazing.
day about this.
And I could listen to you all day, and I so appreciate that. And thank you for sharing vulnerability with us too, and sharing that story. And I think, for me, it's the concept, or one of the calls to justice in particular for men and boys, is around education. And I think part of our education needs to be about, hearing these lived experiences, hearing these stories, believing in them, and then thinking about, how difficult, how painful it must have been to lose the connection to culture, to language, to roots, and build empathy from there, and consider, like, how can we stand silent? How can we not step forward and lend our voice, lend our allyship, our solidarity, and our own calls to change, and become advocates, together with all of you, with Indigenous people and organizations, and of course, not to take over that, but to support, to stand side by side, and to work strongly together to create change, because it's needed. We can't allow for that to continue. It's and so thank you for sharing, and thank you for doing that important work to educate everyone everywhere about this. So audience members, we would love to hear your insights, your comments, your reactions, your questions. Please share with us, raise your hand, or include a question or a comment in the chat. I'm going to call on Johanny to see if there's anyone or any comments that we can take up. No? Okay, Dave, please go ahead. I see that you just entered something in the chat, so please share with us.
Yeah, I just got asked to share that quote that I had read at the beginning, so I'm just putting that up there.
Dave, I actually funniest thing is when you said that, I immediately like screamed internally because I was like, yes, obviously that's like, I think the work of bell hooks so definitely talks about the intersection of how patriarchy affects men and affects boys, and how obviously like that harm is then reproduced. And I mean, Brandy, you were obviously mentioning something like this and something along the similar vein, especially when it comes to trauma. And of course, like, I think it's an oversimplification to say hurt people, but I think it's something that is extremely salient for all of us, because I think when we think about how men and boys are basically forced to cut off that part of themselves and then immediately do harm to functionally everyone else and anyone who is different or not from the, or not, how do I say this, not adjacent to the norms. So we're talking about queer folks, we're talking about trans folks, we're talking about Indigenous folks, Black folks, what have you. It reproduces those systems over and over again. And I think, Humberto, like, especially for you as, you know, the ED of White Ribbon, I mean, education is such an important part, but I think talking about that harm and talking about how we can overcome that harm is honestly, it's one of the toughest things in the work. And when someone figures out how to do that in a way that doesn't cause someone in the room to either lash out or break into tears, I mean, you'll be getting a very nice batch of cookies from me. So yeah, I think being able to talk about harm and also talk about colonial harm, whether or not, you know, folks have had a direct implication in it, I think is part of the struggle. And I think that's also ultimately something that pushes people out and causes them to lash out and to not want to talk about it, because I believe very deeply that a lot of folks, one of their big hesitancies when it comes to working on these topics is that they are not willing to acknowledge the harm that has been done because it is ultimately too much for them. But again, oversimplification, there's some nuance there.
Well, I totally agree with you. I have to say that as someone who has, you know, I've trained my whole life as an intersectional feminist scholar. That did not prepare me for raising a boy within heteropatriarchy. That has been by far the biggest challenge. I'm pretty damn adept at raising strong girls. I have no problem there, but the level at which the socialization of boys happens is stunning. You know, like getting Christmas and every family member has gotten my son, you know, he's 5 years old at the time, but every single one of them had gotten him a gun. And I'm just like, this is the level of socialization. And no matter how well prepared I felt as somebody who studies this, who teaches about this, who works in community, I find that the biggest struggle is disrupting that constant socialization against him. And it comes from everywhere. It comes from family who are like, when he's crying and they're like, wait, big boys don't cry. Or when he's at school and his emotions are too strong for the teacher, so they put him in timeout. Or when he's watching TV and all of the kinds of shows that are kind of fed to him are about strong, angry men, right? Like, I think there's something there that we need to pay more attention to in so many ways. And I see it, like, even I teach a class at it's a second year university level. And when we start on the harm of hegemonic masculinity. And it blows my mind at how much there are so many people who don't want to talk about it, especially because I give them an assignment where they have to talk about their complicity, but they don't want to talk about it. They're really like, no, I don't want to acknowledge my participation and how I harm men and boys. And I think that's fascinating to me, because to me, that's the link to then understanding why women, girls, children, 2S LGBTQIA people are overly targeted, is because of how hegemonic masculinity operates. And I think that when having the two of you talk about that has been really powerful, because no matter how prepared I've felt, it's the biggest battle in my life.
They become
Thank you for sharing, Rob.
really significant entry points through which we can have these conversations, right? So those norms, those stereotypes, those pressures, those harms, and how they harm certainly women and girls, to us LGBTQI plus Indigenous communities. It's so important, and making those connections between those harmful gender norms and stereotypes and various forms of oppression as well, including those directed towards Indigenous people, racialized folks, and so forth. And Will, your call to acknowledge men and boys' own experience with harm and pain is so important. It's often a significant entry point for us to especially work with adult men around turning around their perspectives, their attitudes, their beliefs in a different direction when it comes to thinking about themselves as allies and considering the impacts of these of patriarchy on their own lives as well. So it is part of the work. So thank you for sharing. I see that there
May I
is
say something?
yeah, please, Elder Nora, please.
Okay,
share.
just what Brandy was saying, because my parents lived it. What she was talking about, Indian agents. And my dad and his family had to walk up from their land where they had before that was taken from them. They had to walk up on the railroad tracks to come here in Eel River Bar. And on the map, it says Eel River Bar, swampland, good for Indians. This was nothing but swampland, beautiful scenery, but there was nothing here but swamp. And we built it up and it's beautiful today. But there's no fluent speakers here at all, none left. The Indian agents would come all the time and they would check any given day. So you mentioned that there was no hunting, no fishing. They couldn't trap, but my father used to trap on the side, right? And he told me a story about one time somebody came because there was always someone looking out, right? To protect the rest. And the runner came and said, the Indian agent's coming. And he says, oh my God, I got all these furs. Where, like, if we get caught with them, you know, they'll go to jail or pay $2, which nobody had back then. And so somebody suggested, well, why don't we put them in the well? Well, that was a big chance that they took, because I said, Dad, what if he was thirsty and he wanted a drink of water? He said, I know. And he teared up as he was talking to me. And I said, well, did he find it? And he said, no, he didn't. He wasn't thirsty and he never asked for a drink, but they were some scared when that happened. My mom was fluent Mi'kmaq speaker. And I used to say, Ma, how come you don't talk Mi'kmaq to us? How come? And she said, because I don't want all that to happen to you. And I didn't understand it because I was still young. What? And, you know, but as I got older, yes, I understood when I learned about residential school. Like I knew about residential school when I was about 5, because we had some of my cousins that went there. I didn't understand it though. Yeah, and they couldn't hunt, couldn't fish. And my dad one time had lobster, but there was no legs, no claws, and no tail. All he had was bodies. And I said, well, Dad, where did you get them? And he said, oh, so-and-so gave him them. But what they used to fish lobsters here and give them to some animals that they had. So they weren't good for us, but you know, the animals used to eat them. We weren't allowed to fish salmon. Had to be in their houses at 9 o'clock at night, or they would get arrested. When we were kids, you know, the game Cowboys and Indians. Well, none of us wanted to be the Indians because we said, frig that, we get shot too soon. We'd die too soon. So we'd say, we'll be the Cowboys. It's funny how we knew that as children, you know, that the Indians will die off quick. That's what they called us back then. But yeah, and you spoke about transgender. Around here, there's about maybe 4. We have a very small community, but there's about 4 transgenders here. and quite a few gays and lesbians, and but thank God where we are here, they're accepted. And that's why I'm hoping that, like I told you the story the other day about one of my family members. And yeah, that's scary. So, but we do have a forest school where our children go right into the forest, and they're there maybe 3 times a week, 2 or 3 times a week. So they're learning about our culture and how to cut up meat and to do all that, and they're just little ones. So that's where it needs to start from again. And, and yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing those very heartbreaking stories and reminders. They're still reality in so many instances, right? But I also see, the hope in what you share, the belonging, the inclusion, and that's beautiful to see. And also the opportunity for young people, young Indigenous people, to reconnect to their roots and the language and traditions. That's beautiful. And again, it is something that we can all do as allies, is support that and celebrate that and accept the importance of that, and accept the need for spaces and opportunities like that. So thank you for sharing. I see a question in the chat box here around advocacy, and in particular to NWAC, and thinking more at a systemic level now, and in terms of the kinds of allies we can be in calling for systemic change. What are some of the key advocacy actions that you recommend at this point, perhaps advocacy pieces that are timely, that address current challenges, opportunities for change? Brandy?
Well, education and awareness is a big one. Community engagement, holding perpetrators accountable, building supportive networks. This is just some of the stuff, like off the top of my head, addressing the systemic issues, that contribute to the violence. Just in our province here with Chantel Moore. She died at the hands of a law enforcement officer during a wellness check. She wasn't granted an inquiry. She was granted like an inquest. So when they found the officer guilty, there's no charges. He's walking free. But that right there is the systemic racism. There needs to be more done there, like in this province alone. Like, how can that happen in this day and age? That girl was sleeping on her couch. I was there every step of the way through the inquest, everything. And there's no way that man should still be a police officer. He actually is a police officer about an hour and 20 minutes away from where I'm sitting right now. In order to get to Martha's or Chantel's mother, I have to drive through the city he works in. So, like, more things need to be done. There was just recently a young man who passed away in custody. And despite everything at his inquest, hearing from the medical professionals that they were allowed to hear from. See, there's things that stop from hearing from everybody. So they weren't allowed to hear from nurses. They weren't allowed to hear from this and that. He died of COVID because they refused him medical treatment. Not just here in this province. This stuff is happening all the time. So increasing, Indigenous issues in the media might help, but that also, falls under the education. Like, people need to be educated. I know, most people probably don't know about some of the things I just talked about. So that's where it starts. You can support all the reconciliation efforts. If there's something you see, there's a that clicks, join that. Join with the Indigenous people. Don't speak for us. Speak with us. Stand in solidarity with us when it comes to these issues. Engage with the communities in your area. Get to know them. Get to know the people. I know, like in our community, we have certain events, and usually it's just community members. But if somebody from outside our community showed up, we would welcome them with open arms. And it's pretty much like that in Indigenous communities, I find. So don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to go and engage and meet people. But getting the message out there, education, awareness, letters to the government. You know, when you see things that are unjust, when you see the systemic racism happening, when you see racism happening within the school system, because it does to our children, they're still suffering with that. Not just a few things right off the top of my head.
Beautiful. You know, the change starts with us as individuals, educating ourselves, listening, learning, opening our minds and hearts, as Elder Nora encouraged us to do, right? And accepting our role as allies, as individuals who can stand side by side in solidarity with Indigenous peoples and organizations, and be there. And you know, speaking from personal experience, it feels so good, and it feels so inspiring to be able to do that. And sometimes our mere presence, you know, as Indigenous organizations call for change and action, and us being there and lending our presence, our solidarity, can be so powerful. And it's good, and it's something that, you know, we all need to do, and then advocate for those institutional changes. Our police institutions, our military, our government institutions need to change. And here comes that intersectional allyship, right? Because racialized Black people everywhere experience this oppression and violence at the hands of police forces. We see those calls for justice coming from, you know, the Black Lives Matter movements, and LGBTQ2S trans folks are increasingly on being targeted for the rollback of rights everywhere. So this is something that you know, is on us to all come together and join efforts and lend our solidarity and allyship, and work hard across all of these oppression lines. So I wish we could go on. We could, you know, spend a full day talking about this and go deeper into each of these issues. But you know what? I encourage you all to stay connected. Know that you have allies, willing and wanting allies here at White Ribbon, at the North American Network, and beyond in all your organizations. Let's continue to work together and join efforts and create change and support these calls for justice, because justice for Indigenous people, Indigenous women, girls, 2S, LGBTQI folks is good for all of us. It's needed, and it's about time. So thank you all again to our amazing panelists, to Robin, to Will, to Dave, and thank you, Brandy and Elder Nora, for joining in the conversation as well. And thank you to our amazing audience for joining us today. And I'm going to turn it over to Craig now to help bring the event to a closure. So thank you all.
Wow, thank you everyone. I'm speechless. It's hard to reflect on how much detail and caring and heart has been shared with us today. This is as you know, we're recording, so we'll be able to share this further than those who are in attendance today. But we simply begin with us, and I want to thank you, Humberto, for your fine moderating, and to think about Elder Nora's words. And you know, thank you to Louise and all the panelists, Brandy, Robin, Will, Dave. Wonderful thoughts, experiences, so valuable. I want to just say one word that NAMEN hopes to do more with the Canadian community on the subject and others, and you can look forward to hearing more from us in through the coming year. Our very next event is June 8th, and it'll be talking about fathers and promoting gender equality at the home, and what a father's role can be along those lines. And we'll be working to connect the responsible fatherhood movement, which exists pretty strongly in the world now, and the gender equality movement, which is can be somewhat separate. So we're looking forward to that coming up soon. It's remarkable, and so I'm hoping everyone will drop our website into the chat, and we'll take a look, and and when we get a thank you message and a link to participate in the future, I hope you do, and that we'll be posting these links for today's program along with the resources on our website as well, to be able to find the video and resources there ongoing. So with that, heartfelt thank you. I'd like to invite Elder Nora to return to the front and to think about her words and words for closing our program and community today. So, Elder Nora. Oh, Elder Nora, you're on mute still. Maybe I can unmute you. Let me see. There you go.
Unmute myself, it says right here.
Perfect.
Wow.
You're set.
Yeah. I want to thank Brandy. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's an honor and a privilege, and I love sitting in and I love listening to what's going on in the world, and I get to do this work too because I go into schools. I work with youth that other people just invite me, and I'm able to share our vision with the children, the ones that's coming up, to know that everything that you talked about, So this is a sacred kind of love I want to share with you. I got this message in 1999. I don't often share this because I don't like, some people may believe, some may not, but I call this book Words from Beyond because I was going to a dowsing convention in Vermont in 1999. And I thought I was going there to hear people, and I was going to write some things down that I would hear. So I bought 2 of these, bought myself some pens. And I wasn't feeling good, so I went in the room by myself to try to sleep. And believe it or not, this voice comes and says, "Get a pen." And I sat up and I said, "Get a pen? I got nothing to write about." I laid back down, and the second time a voice says, "Get a pen." And I said, "I got nothing to write about." So I laid back down. Third time was strong. "Get a pen and paper." And I went, okay. I picked this up, got that, and I even put, "I'm inspired to write and I don't know why." So I just, took my pen and these words came out. Love is beyond measurement. It can't be surfaced from within your own soul. Love comes in very many forms. Only each one knows individually the process of one's own healing. Love is energy that flows in each and every one of us. Don't ask questions about divine love. Honesty will relinquish tranquility within one's own spirit. Guiding another is useful if one is ready. We are a mirror image of our own soul. Light is love for many who needs and wants it. Let my divine love shine through you, for love is power and wisdom. It is like a 3-dimensional glass that flows within all of us, that surrounds each and every one of us. Share this message with all who can benefit my divine love. Love is power, wisdom, and understanding. Take this power and let it shine through you. Knowledge is the key to understanding the universe of the epitome of life. Go forth and share this message of light and love. That's what you're made up of, light and love. And it says, I have spoken, Spirit Guide Alma. And that was my first message. I didn't know that I could connect like that. I've heard of many since then. So yeah. I'd love to do something more someday around this. But here's another song that I like to say came to me, you know. Again, these words came. Hope you enjoy. Come from Turtle Island, so brave and so strong. We come from this land, knowing we belong. We pray for the children, the old and the weak, living for patience, open to see. Hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, ya, hey ya, hey ya. Hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, ya, hey ya, hey ya. For the turtle is patient, so gentle and wise. Come gather around us, children, 'cause we're the turtle clan. We pray for the children, the old and the weak, living for patience, open to see. Hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, ya, hey ya, hey ya. Hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, ya, hey ya, hey ya. Hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, ya, hey ya, hey yo, hey ho, hey ho. Wala li ako sit no kama. Oh, thank you. Wala li ako.
Wonderful, Eldenora. Thank you. And everyone, thank you for attending today. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.